She's an election attorney. She's a town hall columnist. She's from Arizona, one of the contested states, and she's got a lot of knowledge that we need right now because things are flying at us at such a fast rate, and it's so hard for everybody to figure out what in the heck is going on. So, Rachel, first, let me just jump right into this. Let's start with Sidney Powell's allegations that she brought before. Were you able to see the press conference when she was on there with Rudy Giuliani and everybody?
Yes, I watched the entire thing. And I'd like to point out, too, for our viewers that I'm not only a former elections attorney, but I was the attorney for the Maricopa County Elections Office. So I know exactly what's going on there. I'm still talking to people who used to work inside there as actual employees. And, you know, I saw the whole press conference, and the thing that really struck me was Sidney was describing all of the evidence that she will be submitting in the form of affidavits, primarily is my understanding, to the court, probably filing on Wednesday. And yet the mainstream media just keeps whining that there is no evidence.
Right. Now, that's okay. So that's one of the main things that we have to get to during this interview is what constitutes evidence from a lawyer's point of view. I think a lot of people are talking out of their ear and they're saying this doesn't count as evidence, that doesn't count as evidence. You know, and that's a good thing. Sometimes it's good to get outside of the lawyer's mindset. But for a lot of these people that are going on and on about that, they don't really understand what an evidentiary standard is. So we want to get to that. Overall, having worked in elections, and, you know, I've studied elections in various parts of the world. I just got a whole bunch of information from people in the Philippines about the contested election in the Philippines in 2004 that seems to be tied to these exact same Smartmatic machines and involved officials who went on. One of them went on to become the director of elections for Tarrant County this year. So there's a lot of stuff that we can look at in terms of past precedent, but definitely for Rachel, how outrageous or unlikely did these allegations strike you? When you heard Powell and Giuliani and Ellis lay out their case, did that strike you as something that just is so absurd you could dismiss it prima facie?
I feel like I'm living in two, you know, different realities, because when I got done listening to that entire press conference, I was so blown away. I thought, you know, heads are going to roll. People are going to go to prison for this. This is one of the most incredible, horrendous things I've ever heard. We now have, you know, third world elections. And then, you know, you go turn on the mainstream media right after that, and they all were just completely dismissive, like it's no big deal. And I'm thinking, really? You know, what is the double standard? Why are the Democrats above the law? Why do they get to commit felony after felony? Because that is what this is. This isn't just simple administrative flaws. This is not, you know, civil violations. This is not even criminal misdemeanors. This is felonious crimes.
Right. Well, let me just jump in this as a literary person to complement what you're saying as a lawyer. I mean, part of this is it's a philosophical question. Do you believe that human beings have it in their nature to engage in a conspiracy of this scale? Because if everything adds up in terms of what the different lawyers are bringing, it looks as though the plan was on the part of the Democrats to commit voter fraud on many different levels in a certain way to trip us up so that, you know, we might get caught up in the issue of excess absentee ballots or ballots being fed in through a machine too many times. And then they could quietly get away with the computer algorithms, right? Or if we catch the computer algorithms, we'll miss all the ballot stuffing. So it looks to me as though this was a conspiracy that was very well planned out. They didn't dot all of their I's, obviously, because they've gotten caught at this point. But a lot of people are they're stunned because they don't think that human beings are capable of this. And I'm looking at this. There are election frauds that have happened in many parts of the world. I've worked with liberals in academia. I know that they can engage in cheating and fraud on a very institutional, structural scale. So I have no doubt that people were capable of this. The question is, what do we need to prove it in a court of law? I mean, if she has 5,000 affidavits, is that enough to make the case from the perspective of a lawyer?
It all comes down to the judge. And that is why, the Republicans have been saying from day one that this is going to be decided in the Supreme Court. It's not going to be decided by a left-wing federal district court judge. It's not going to be decided by the Court of Appeals, because those judges can twist the law to say whatever they want. Because what they're going to do with the affidavits, the left-wing judges, is they're going to say, well, they're not really believable. This person probably had an axe to grind, or, they were put together as stooges by the Republicans to write up these affidavits. They were pressured, blah, blah, blah. Any judge that wants to, we all know, they don't make their decisions based on the law half the time. They make their decisions based on the outcome they want. And they invented a term for it many years ago. It's called judicial activism, and it's still around and going strong.
So when people say, which I have heard repeated over and over and over again, that 35 out of Trump's 37 lawsuits have been struck down in court, and the odds are so against him that there's no way this thing will actually get decided in his favor. What do people mean, and should we take that seriously? When they talk about all of these different court cases being thrown out, what are they talking about?
Well, on the one hand, we should take it seriously, and on the other hand, we shouldn't take it seriously. And here's why I say that. We shouldn't take it seriously because every single one of those federal district court opinions can be appealed. So every one of them, with some very rare exceptions, getting around those rules, should be able to be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. But where we should be concerned is this is also being fought in the court of public opinion. And so people are pressuring Republicans to stop supporting Trump and stop supporting the efforts, and they are threatening attorneys to drop from the cases. And if you put a 26-year-old amateur attorney on one of these appeals who doesn't know what he's doing, it's going to be easy to get the appeal thrown out. And, here's one area where I disagree with Sydney. I heard her on Newsmax yesterday, and she was explaining, why she didn't produce evidence at the press conference. Well, she did discuss at the press conference some affidavits that would be submitted. Well, I would just give the bastards what they want. And I would have sat there at that press conference and I would have read boring affidavit after boring affidavit after boring affidavit. And I would, I would sit there and I would go on for over 2 hours until the media shut up.
So sort of like the TMI technique, the too much information technique. All right. So basically what you're saying, let me just see if I can try to group together what you said for someone who's not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. You're saying that a lot of these court cases that have been decided yet are still at the lower levels in the larger scheme of things. And they're at a level which is local, we could even say parochial, and to a certain extent, it's a little bit capricious. It's a little bit arbitrary as to whether the judges are going to rule in favor or not at this level, right? So,
right, especially since these judges are all in these big blue city areas for the most part. So I guarantee you, even if there's a handful of them that were appointed by a Republican, Republicans appoint a lot of left-wing judges as well. We're guilty of that. So I guarantee you almost all of them are on the left.
Well, so is it possible that the Trump team is intentionally doing this so that he can go to the Supreme Court? Is that part of a possible strategy that he's using? And that is to say, let's get all of these lower courts to reject our case so that we go to the appeals court and we keep on escalating it because our ultimate goal is to get to the Supreme Court, right?
That's correct. And if there was a shortcut that he could go immediately to the Supreme Court, I'm sure he would have done it by now.
Okay, so this is actually not, when they say in the press, okay, it's all but over because they've gotten rejected, that's not actually the case. It's actually, there's still a golden opportunity.
It's law school 101.
Yeah.
When you file a complaint in court and the judge throws it out, your next step is automatically to appeal. I mean, they're not even, putting this in their news articles. They're just saying it's over. And I'm so sick and tired of people tweeting that at me. It's like, you are such an idiot, and they're taking advantage of people who aren't lawyers, who don't understand the law, and making them just sound like idiots, in my opinion.
Right. Okay. So let's say this gets to the Supreme Court. Okay. And then now, finally, this is their day in court. Let's just start with one basic question. What are the possibilities that the Supreme Court could do? Does the Supreme Court have the power to tell these different states to give electoral votes to Trump? Or is the best that they can do to simply say these states cannot send their electors because there's too many questions about fraud in their districts?
There is a lot that the Supreme Court could do, and there's arguments whether they could go that far as to actually assign votes to Trump. The most likely thing they would do is they would just order another vote. And it would be massive, and it would be, a lot of work, but they would order probably that entire state, maybe the entire county, just the entire county. But my guess is probably an entire state to recount, to revote.
To revote. I mean, I've never. Wow, would they do that? Would we actually see this happen, like a revote?
It just happened in Kenya recently in 2017. They ordered an entire revote of the entire country, and their constitution is very similar to ours. Wow.
Okay. All right. So that's the question in terms of the remedy. What would they need to? What does Sidney Powell need to deliver in order to get a favorable ruling like that? I mean, okay. So you said that affidavits, depending on the judge, might carry weight or not carry weight. But I mean, does she need to actually have what people would call hard evidence, like a digital trace of people in the drop box shifting the votes? I mean, if she doesn't have that, does she have enough based on the testimonials, the circumstantial evidence, the affidavits, and then the statistical irregularities, and then the extent that we have of physical evidence having been destroyed or not taken care of? So ultimately, there's a big question mark over them. I mean, what does she need?
Well, I think if she comes up with numerous affidavits from people saying they either saw the hacking going on of the Dominion voting machines, or even better, they participated in it. That's what I'm hoping. That's the real smoking gun. If she can just come up with that, I believe the Supreme Court is fair enough that they will overturn the results in those areas and order a revote.
Wow. Okay. And so, I mean, I think that I have confidence from what I've seen Sidney Powell. I think that she's got the evidence. I don't think that they would have gone out on this limb like this. So, I mean, this gives people quite a bit of hope. What do you think we're facing in terms of the composition of the court? We have the 9 justices. How many of them do you think have the stomach to render a decision that's going to cause the cities to start burning and riots to break out?
I think we're going to get at least 5. I don't care about any more than that. We just need 5, and I think we've got it. Let's see. I mean, you've just got the 3 liberal justices left. So unless Roberts caves.
What about Amy Coney Barrett? Do you think she's going to pull a surprise on us and recuse herself?
No. I have really good vibes about that woman.
Yeah.
I have more hopes for her than I did Kavanaugh. And, maybe it's a gut instinct, but, I watched her during the confirmation hearings, and I think she's pretty solid.
Right. How much should we bring in the testimonials from people outside the United States, or is that just going to cloud the discussion at this point? I just got a lot of information from people I know in the Philippines about a contested election there. I can tell you a little bit about it. There's a guy named Hyder. Was his last name Garcia? Let me just double check this for 1 second. This is somebody, Hyder Garcia. Yeah, he was this year the director of elections for Tarrant County, where I live. And in this huge, bizarre surprise, Trump had won at the end of election night. And then a couple days later, they said they found more data, and all of a sudden Biden won the county, which is absurd. Tarrant County is so pro-Trump, it's almost impossible. And this guy who was just hired as the director of elections very recently, 2 years ago, he was brought before the legislature of the Philippines, and they called him a son of a bee. They were screaming at him because of the allegations of fraud and the proof of fraud in the election that had happened in the Philippines. Now, my contacts there said that was in relation to a 2004 election in which this very popular candidate was leading, and then the power outage took place all across the Philippines. And then when the power came back on and people had electricity again and they could tune back into the television, all of a sudden Arroyo was leading. And there was so much conflict over this election, and so many people felt that this must have been fraudulent, that the president actually had to declare a martial law. So, I mean, we're hearing these same stories from Brazil, from Venezuela, from all around the world where the same thing happens. It often deals with Smartmatic. And what ends up happening is we have a situation where the one person is leading, and then the power goes out or the machines stop tabulating. And then when the power goes back on and we have operations again, then all of a sudden the other person is leading by tons of votes. And there's always a similar thing where there's a refusal to let people look at the ballots. The media tends to always get in on it and say, no, there's no question. They kind of gaslight the population and pretend like there was never a lead, no matter how many people saw it. So if we see this in so many different countries, how useful is it to bring that up in the American discussion? Because I don't know whether Americans think that they're a different species or something. I'm stunned by how people in the United States think that these frauds, which are so common all around the world, could just never happen here. You know, I mean, how relevant do you think the international experience is to us?
I think it's very relevant. And, you know, you look at a lot of Supreme Court opinions and they often look at other countries. They even rely on other countries' law sometimes. So, you know, and my friend in Kenya, you know, he said that's exactly what happened there, you know, where the power went out in the middle of the night and then the power went back on, and the crooked incumbent candidate was then ahead. And so I think it's terribly relevant. And I think, you know, we have a good enough Supreme Court that they are going to look at this. I just find it sickening that the Democrats don't care about felony fraud. And, you know, I posted earlier today, the difference between the Democrats and us is if the roles were reversed and our side had committed felony fraud to put Trump ahead, what would I be calling for? I would be calling for the courts to do a full and thorough investigation. I would not be demanding that, you know, the Biden team just shut up and concede like they're trying to do to us.
Yes, I don't know what the Democrats are thinking. I mean, I've kind of lost my ability to track their reasoning, because to me, it sounds, if I were Joe Biden, there's no way I would want to take office with a cloud hanging over me. If I really believed that I had won, I would just be confident. I would put my hands behind my back and my feet up on the desk, and I would be like, yeah, do a recount. Let's go. Let's find out. I mean, that's how you act. When I catch somebody cheating, or I accuse somebody of cheating as a teacher, you can kind of tell by their reaction whether they were guilty or not. If they were innocent, usually they're like, okay, yeah, sure. You know, go do an internet search on it. You know, fine, I'll prove it. I can show you the notes and I can show you how I wrote this myself. If they're guilty, then they start to attack you, or they come up with some other allegation against you and they try to undermine it that way. It just seems to me as though the Democrats are really going to suffer huge losses in their credibility. They already have, but it's going to get worse the more that they blow this off, because they sat there with a straight face and they said that there was no fraud. Then they said there was no widespread fraud. Then they said there was widespread fraud, but it's not enough to change the election. Now they're just basically boiling it down to, well, the courts can't do anything. And you can't prove anything because people who were sympathetic to us threw away all the evidence and they didn't secure the machines. And so there's no way to retrace your step. So you don't have any evidence. So they're trying to like trap us in this circular reasoning that I don't think is going to work. And I think they're going to come across looking like the perpetrators of a huge fraud and a huge lie. you know?
Yeah, you're correct. They don't want to go back and do an investigation because they don't want to get caught. They don't want the
Right.
evidence coming up. And so they're going to just, continue going and trying to make us all sound like conspiracy theorists. And
Right.
with the mainstream media supporting them and people with, short memories, eventually all this, they're going to look back and just call this a conspiracy freak, and people will move on, and they'll go on and they'll say, Biden's our president, and, let's just treat him as such. And you know what? If Biden becomes president, I'm not going to, respect him. I mean, granted, I have to abide by the law under him. So yeah, I'll abide by the law, but
Right.
I'm never going to admit that he is a legitimate president.
Yeah, I will never say it either. It would be impossible for me to. All right. Well, as an attorney, as you're looking at this, how good are the chances that our Constitution is going to be able to continue strong in America, or is this just one step towards basically us moving towards a time when the Constitution is just falling apart in terms of we don't follow it anymore, we don't even pay attention to it anymore? I mean, what are our chances going forward?
Well, since I give Trump about a 30% chance at this point of pulling through, which means the Supreme Court will get to decide and do the right thing, I think it's looking pretty bad for our Constitution. The odds are against us.
Yeah, because ultimately, if we cannot trust the election results, and 47% of the country does not believe that this was a fair election, and that's even with all of the shy Trump voter effect, et cetera. I mean, that's catastrophic in my mind. That would be catastrophic to become president and to have that enormous of a segment of the population just doesn't believe in the system anymore. I mean, that's the recipe for the fall of a country. It can get pretty bad from there. Thank you so much for giving your advice, Rachel. I always enjoy talking to you, and please let me know if you come up with any big insights about where this is going. Everyone is on tenterhooks. What advice would you give to people who are all just dying to hear from Sidney Powell what the evidence is and where things can go? What advice would you give people?
Well, I would first of all follow her on Twitter because she is tremendous. She tweets up a storm. And secondly, maybe just do a Google, well, not Google, but maybe like a DuckDuckGo news search for her name regularly. You can schedule these regular searches to find out.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Bobby.
Bye bye.